are live. Welcome to another episode of Red Grace Live. As always, my name is Emilio Ramos. I'm here with Micah Whitehead. Micah, it's good to see that you can get your earpiece in. Literally, 2 seconds before we went live here?
Right before.
Man, as is your custom. As is your custom, brother. Hey, it's good to be back. We missed a couple weeks. We even had several of you guys wondering, hey, where'd you go? My wife and I and Eden, we went on a little vacation. And, I told Micah before the show, kind of debating talking about that vacation a little bit because something really extraordinary happened on that vacation that I have to be remarkably secretive about, but it's almost like, how can I not talk about it without any details, literally, that I'm able to give? I had an opportunity to attend a private talk given by Bill Gates on the issue of AI, the future of AI and robotics and artificial intelligent machines and all that stuff. And I was able to I was even allowed to ask Bill Gates a question, which is kind of remarkable.
Are you the Antichrist?
Yeah, not a lot of people get to ask Bill Gates a question. I did ask him a question, and it revolved around the subject of posthumanism. I was able to articulate that, and I thought, this is really interesting, Micah. Because I've done the new apologetics now for some time,
right?
That I have, sort of invested years now in the study of transhumanism, AI, posthumanism, all of this stuff. And it's remarkable how God providentially put me in that position, not only to be able to listen to a whole presentation by one of the cutting edge leading kind of insiders into that whole elite world of technology and global type thinking, but he is connected to everybody that's, actually at the kind of the precipice of all that stuff. And he actually mentioned how that he stepped away from the technology angle to focus on things like, vaccines and other things. That he recently had a meeting with a lot of leaders and developers in AI and other large language model type technology, and that he was shocked how that we are literally now right on the precipice here in the next couple years of large language models like ChatGPT going from here to here in technology, or from here, where's my angle at, all the way up to here, and that exponential growth is coming very, very quickly. And Mr. Gates went so far as to say that pretty soon we are going to start seeing robotic agents that we will all have, if we wish, that will basically be our intellectual counterparts in life. And really staggering stuff that I heard. And my question to him simply was to kind of cut right to the short of it, after I cited some authorities in the field that I knew he knew and I knew he would have to respect and respond to. And he did. To Bill Gates' credit, he did not ignore my question or skirt the question, or he didn't make light of the question. He actually went into quite in depth to respond to my question. But my question had to do with posthumanism and how many leading experts are now warning, they're becoming alarmists, and they are now warning us of the impending danger that AI, transhumanism, and things like that pose to us, and how that we can quickly find ourselves in a post-human future. Everything from virtual post-humanism, meaning things like, well, you're just not really needed anymore because we have an AI that can play the piano better than you. We've got AI artists that, the machines can do better art, better videos, better editing, better music, better everything. And so how are you necessary exactly anymore? Yeah. They can count better than you. They can communicate better than you. They can research better than you. And so again, all the way from that to all the way to, catastrophic actual human replacement, replacement of the human race, which of course, as a Christian, we don't believe that's even possible until God's purposes are finished. But it was fascinating, Micah, I must tell you, just to be there, to stand in front of one of the true global elites in our world, and a guy that is no stranger to criticism and enthusiasm both. And to get to ask him a question was an interesting moment in my life. So
did he acknowledge your concerns with posthumanism? Yes. Or does he share the same thing, or did he just blow it off as the technology is too great for us to not let this stop us?
No, actually, to quote him directly, he said at one point in attempting to answer my question, that is the grand question. And he understands the threat is real. He didn't make light of the people that I brought up, the people that I mentioned to him, because I know he couldn't, because these guys are far too authoritative in the field.
Right.
And so he just basically said that, it's going to be tricky. It's going to be tough. It's going to take a global effort, which I thought, okay, this answer is getting worse and worse the more he's talking, even though he's trying to, in a sense, bring comfort to the people that he was talking to. And those people, I'm not even allowed to talk about. So let me just say that it was a very, very rare opportunity with a very unique group of people. And that's pretty much all I can actually say about it, really.
Did you scare all the other participants in the room with your question?
Oh, that's funny. I did get some feedback. And actually, yes, there was a lot of, let me just put it this way, there was a lot of interest in who I was and why I asked that question, and it provoked a lot of interesting conversation among a lot of people. So fascinating stuff, kind of out of world experience right there. But anyway, as interesting as robots are, and Terminator and Skynet and everything like that, more interesting is actually the doctrine of the Trinity.
Yeah.
And I have been sitting on this issue, not just Reformed Trinitarianism, but I have been sitting on this issue that of what I now call the Reformed path. It will take quite a bit of explanation just to get to that, how I arrived at that, or what does that refer to, or what am I talking about? But it really made me think, Micah, that as interesting as that whole thing is with AI and the future and technology and the headlines and global events and whatever's going on, and I was reminded in the study, it's just I've been reflecting on the Trinity here. I was just reminded how the Apostle Paul in Colossians chapter 3 tells us what he says. Set your mind on things above, where Christ is seated, not on the things of this earth or the things on earth, which is a remarkable statement that he's making there if you think about it. It's like, let's say in Paul's day, how can you not set your mind on the things of this earth? Don't you know who Caesar is? Don't you know what's going on in, I don't know, Rome? The whole world is being taken over by Rome, okay? You're surrounded by paganism and philosophy of a pagan kind, and there's all this, there's all this threat from the state and persecution and all of that. And yet the Apostle Paul, in true pilgrim theology form, calls us higher, to a higher contemplation, that there's just more interest, and it's far more interesting to meditate on the things above. And I tell you, when you spend a couple hours or a few hours reading in-depth theology on the Trinity, I can tell you that meditating on the being of God is incomparable to anything you are going to behold on the headlines or in the headlines and in current events. We are talking about the mystery of God. We're talking about the divine mysteries that are contained in God's revealed word. And you want to talk about edification. I promise you, spend 3 hours meditating on the inner workings of the Trinity and tell me how your soul feels compared to 3 hours surfing the headlines on your favorite, your news outlet of choice or whatever. It's just not comparable. So, yeah. So, I think I did a good job, Micah. I think I remained anonymous or somewhat maintained a lot of anonymity in that statement about Bill Gates and everything.
I think it was enough. Right. Well, I mean, this is such a deep topic. I mean, I was kind of chuckling whenever you were just saying that, what you studied, and I can only think of, it's probably so high shelf that, I mean, I know that you want to speak specifically to those that are educated and those who are shepherding the flock themselves, but please put some stuff on the lower shelf as well, so that whenever I can think about this, I can shepherd my family, not just not as a pastor, but as a priest in my own home, kind of an idea. But this is going to be something that is it's kind of not out there, but it's a kind of a hard thing to grasp, I think, at the level that you are going to take us tonight.
Yeah, it is. And certainly I was meditating on this because I was thinking, we're going to do some deeper theology tonight. And I was thinking, for those that want, obviously practical theology, let's say from Red Grace Media, you can go over to Christ and Kingdom podcast. Mm-hmm. And on the Christ and Kingdom podcast, my team, Pastor Mac Tiemann and I, we've been walking through this little book right here by Sinclair Ferguson, which is, you want to talk about practical theology. I mean, I don't know if it gets more practical than that, but The Christian Life by Sinclair Ferguson, which is very doctrinal because it's Sinclair Ferguson, but it's also done in a very, very practical way. And so we have done, I think 10 episodes so far through the chapters.
Yeah.
And super practical. I hope, some of the feedback I've received, super useful and easy to understand. And so you can head over there and get as much practical theology as you want, but today we are dealing with a subject that I am remarkably excited about, but also burdened about, and which has kind of led me to the present moment to discuss this issue of the Reformed path and what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. And so in order to do that, we'll have to interact with all kinds of points. And so the opening word here, our first word, I'll try to kind of break that down. So let's do that, Micah, and then we'll jump into the subject matter here. Well, again, I don't think you can have a heavier discussion than the doctrine of God. When you look at the entire encyclopedia of theology, theology proper is the most important because it doesn't get more fundamental, more foundational, more essential than the being of God himself. And so anytime we're talking about the doctrine of God, of course, our God is triune. There is no contemplation of God apart from his Trinitarian nature. And so this becomes remarkably important as we think about both ancient and modern controversies surrounding the doctrine of God. And, I wanted to address something that I think is remarkably prevalent in the church today, and again, prevalent throughout the history of the church. And that is the issue of mutualism, or what Cornelius Van Til called correlativism. And so we need to understand, how does the threat of mutualism happen? How does it obtain in the church? What are the different paths that open up the doorway for this? And so we need to consider that very much so. We've entered into a time in Reformed theology where something like, we talk about big evangelicalism, and how many people, including yours truly, are trying to separate from that because it's just losing its sort of historic, certainly Protestant, Reformed, creedal, confessional, anything even remotely resembling that in many big churches today. But there's also now, I think, something like what we can call big Calvinism, where Calvinism has become such a broad and general umbrella for Calvinist thought that you can have all sorts of conflicting concepts going on all under the banner of Calvinism. And so you can have pastors who are both Calvinists, but that are miles apart on very important theological truth. And I'm not just talking about sort of the classic issues that have divided us. Let's say the mode of baptism, Presbyterian, Baptist. I think that's we're always going to have that. But I think there's other ways, there's other things that require for us to now begin to call for some kind of unified, holistic, harmonious and consistent Reformed theology in a number of areas. But let me just explain to you why we need this comprehensive approach to Reformed theology. You might have someone that is a fan of Van Til, let's say, for example, and his apologetics, and yet they will believe or agree with somebody like Thomas Aquinas, the Roman Catholic Church, on an issue like something central to the Trinity. For example, a denial of the doctrine of the Aseity of the Son. Why? Because they believe that the essence of God is communicated between persons. Father communicates the essence to the Son through eternal generation. And so you can have pieces of Reformed theology and yet great deviations in Reformed theology. You might have a confessional Reformed pastor or author, a theologian or a seminary. They may affirm the Westminster Confession, the London Baptist Confession, and yet they might reject the doctrine of simplicity. They might reject the doctrine of impassibility or have some kind of mutualist error where they undermine the idea of the absoluteness of God and his immutability. And so these are just some of the ways. I mean, you can have a broad spectrum of sections in the church that are Calvinist, but still reject what I would call Reformed eschatology. And we'll get to the kind of categories here in a minute. But, they might affirm the 5 points of Calvinism, but they might reject what I would call Reformed eschatology and the two-age structure of theology for something like a more of a classic dispensational view, a hyper-literal hermeneutic, for example, an Israel-centric hermeneutic rather than a Christ-centric hermeneutic. And all of those things, of course, are not Reformed. Dispensationalism, a hyper-literal approach rather than a redemptive historical approach. Those things are not rooted in the Reformed tradition. They may try to argue that they are, but they're not. That's a misunderstanding completely. You might have people that use covenant theology language, but they compromise something as important as the nature of the covenant of works, a major deviation from historic Reformed orthodoxy. And so I'm just trying to show you how there are so many different permutations of Calvinism today, or what is known as what is conceived of under the general category of Calvinism, and yet there can be a direct, diametrically opposite conviction regarding some point of theology that completely breaks with the Reformed tradition altogether. And so what we're saying is, look, there are all sorts of great books that are written out there by great authors that have a lot of great truth in them, but yet you can have things that even if you're talking about biblical theology, there's a lot of work that's done in the realm of biblical theology, for example. Today, biblical theology is remarkably popular and very trendy, even to write on those things. But for many biblical theologians, quote unquote, they have no connection, no necessary, explicit, or overt connection to covenant theology. And again, from a Reformed perspective, what is biblical theology? Biblical theology is simply the exhibition of covenant theology throughout all of Scripture. That's it. And again, it just shows that you can have, various aspects of Reformed thought and yet be at very critical points of theology missing the deeper logic, the Trinitarian structures of your theology and what's necessary for a consistent theology. It's not, of course, that we're claiming to have everything right, but that there are just some categories that really, really need to, we need to really understand these things. And this is why I have conceived of the Reformed path as extending beyond the doctrine of God and touching these other areas of theology. But let me give you one last example to really maybe illustrate what I'm talking about. Again, very typical, very common today for Calvinist brethren to be presuppositional in their apologetics. Many are not. If you come from Escondido, for example, Westminster Escondido, the apologetics movement that's going on there is really not Van Tilian. It's far more classical. It's more Thomistic. And therefore, you can have a Calvinist, however, that subscribes to presuppositional apologetics, but they don't know how Van Til's apologetic is actually rooted in Vossian biblical theology, for example. And in fact, they fail to grasp Van Til's most fundamental nexus of theology, which is for Van Til, the ontological Trinity. So you can have an argument, let's say, for example, you can teach somebody an argument like the transcendental argument, the presuppositional argument, the impossibility of the contrary type of argument, and yet not understand how Van Til's doctrine of God, doctrine of the Trinity, really is central and controlling to everything in Van Til's paradigm of theology. So when we're talking about the Reformed path, again, we've covered this before. Let me say it here again, because we're going to hit each one of these issues moving forward. Number one, we are talking about Reformed Trinitarianism today. Number two, we're talking about Reformed federalism, covenant theology. Hope to cover that, if not in our next episode, soon as possible. Reformed biblical theology that is in the tradition of Voss and Klein and even G.K. Beale and many others, so that our biblical theology is a reformed biblical theology. It is not simply an exercise in scientific theology where the name of the game is simply to catalog all sorts of different, themes in the Bible, even central themes, without having some worldview, i.e., the Reformed covenantal worldview that we, from a Reformed perspective, exposit from Scripture, undergirding all of your biblical theology. And so biblical theology really needs to be something we talk about. And then, of course, Reformed apologetics, because I believe that what is going on in much apologetics today and in the past, of course, is more of a synthetic apologetic, where you have part of your apologetic rooted and grounded in revelation, the revelatory God, and another aspect of your apologetic rooted and grounded in reason or rationalism. And so we need to come home to a thoroughly reformed apologetic, because that touches on a thoroughly reformed world view, world and life view. And then last of all, we have to have a reformed eschatology. And that might be remarkably controversial, because a lot of people that say, well, I am Reformed and I'm postmillennial, or I'm Reformed and I'm still premillennial. And of course, at this point, I would say, well, that's kind of what I'm saying. I'm saying that you can have Calvinism, you can have a lot of Reformed theology, you may even have covenant theology in your theology, but the minute you deviate, I believe, from the simple, clear-cut, two-age structure of the Bible, in my opinion, if you just look at the great confessions, Westminster, London Baptist, and others, Helvetic, for example, it is very clear from the confessions that the assumption was that there is only two ages, this present evil age and the age to come. Anything else amounts to sort of a third concept, a third dimension, a third world, a third thing that introduces all sorts of, I believe, debilitating problems for your theology. So those are the things that we're covering: Reformed, Trinitarianism, federalism, biblical theology, apologetics, and eschatology. So I hope to do one episode at least that is going to cover each one of those fundamental categories in theology. So that I think sets the stage for what we're going to do today and moving forward.
So normally out of these things, out of your first word, I always try to ask a good question. And I'm kind of left blank because one of the things that you kind of laid out is like, I don't really understand where a lot of this goes. I mean, and just to give everybody a quick history, I grew up in a charismatic family. I as soon as I graduated and I moved out, I started going to a Southern Baptist church thinking that was the most conservative thing that I could possibly find. And then yet I've just been continuing to run to the right. And I've identified as a Reformed believer for at least the last decade, but I still feel like I'm missing all of these things that you've laid out tonight. Where has the church gone? Where has the church gone wrong in this study, and how have we lost this?
I don't think that's a simple answer. I don't think there's one thing that you can point to say this was the point of departure. You can bring in, post-Enlightenment thought. You can bring in, a higher German criticism and liberalism. You can bring in the rise of dispensationalism as a major factor for the declension of Reformed theology. You can bring in the rise of evangelicalism, let's say from Billy Graham onwards, that has led to something of an ahistorical approach to Christianity, where the name of the game became decisionism, and that all that really matters is for you to make a decision for Christ, kind of check that box off the list. Right. You check that off, you're good, you're done. You walk the aisle, you sign the card, you prayed the prayer, you're done. Everything else is just kind of footnotes and details, and you don't bother with the isms and schisms. And so evangelicalism introduced a remarkable amount of anti-intellectualism. And then when the church sort of rediscovered its intellectual self, how it did that was that it did that kind of almost in a deconstruction kind of way, where it was, let's start building our theology from scratch all over again. Instead of standing on the shoulders of giants, the Christian world became biblicist. It became me and the Bible and my local church and my pastor, and that's all I need. I don't need to go back to the confessions. I don't need to go back to the primary thinkers, the seminal theologians, the critical stages of church history. And so you kind of lost the development of Christian thought up to what we believe to be, right, sort of the greatest expression of Christian theology the world has ever seen in the Protestant Reformation and in the Reformed legacy that followed, which is part of what I would call the Reformed path. And of course, the Reformed path tackles all those issues that we listed there and getting those right. So something like that, Mike, I hope that helps a little bit, but there's a lot of factors because you are asking a historical question. How did we get to where we are now? There are immediate concerns that are answered probably better than anyone by David Wells. No Place for Truth, God in the Wasteland, Courage to be Protestant, God in the Whirlwind. You read those books by David Wells, you will have a pretty good grasp the last couple centuries what happened to us, right? And so that's why I spent so much time reading Wells, because his insights and his understanding of how we got to where we are is very penetrating, and I think he does it the best. But here we are, and of course we can add to that, Micah. We can add to that the role that academia has played, the seminaries, the Bible colleges, the modern theologians of today, and the way that accreditation works. I mean, we can go on and on and on to get into reasons why the church became more deconstructive, more postmodern, ahistorical, non-confessional, ultimately non-reformed, and thinly Protestant, if not all out ecumenical. So, I mean, something like that, we've got to grapple with all those issues if we're going to try to answer or to diagnose what's going on there. Yeah. So, I brought up the subject of the Reformed path, and I wanted to kind of give people a little bit of a background of where did I get this concept of the Reformed path. I developed this initially by reading Dr. Tipton's book on Cornelius, the Trinitarian theology of Cornelius Van Til. And I've held this book up many times. I've held this thing up to you before. But on page 20 and 21 of this book, we have what Lane calls the deeper Protestant conception. And of course, the deeper Protestant conception is the phrase that comes from Gerhardus Voss's Reformed Dogmatics, as he is responding to Thomas Aquinas and the Catholic Church and what they called the deeper Catholic conception. What is this conception? This conception is all about how God relates to man in creation and in glorification. And so it's deeply eschatological. It is deeply anthropological because we're dealing with the nature of man. And it's also deeply eschatological because we're talking about how man returns to God in glory. Does he stand before God in a beatific vision? Or as Thomas taught, does he participate directly in the essence of the triune God? And so what that amounted to for Dr. Tipton is this issue of mutualism, or what, again, Van Til would call correlativism. But then on page 20 to 21, and I think we could put this up, Micah, because I wanted to read this entire quote, interact with it a little bit, because when I'm talking about the Reformed path, it is inspired by this right here. Because I think that as we work through this, all the 5 branches of theology I mentioned are all found right here. And so I joke around with Lane that he likes to call it the DPC, the deeper Protestant conception, as Voss did. And that's what it is. And I like to call it the Reformed path because what I'm saying is that it's different from the Roman Catholic path, the modernist path, Karl Barth, right? And any permutation of mutualism, correlativism, open theism, all of this stuff. What I'm saying is that there is a strict Reformed path of theology, and we do not need to settle for mutations, synthetic mutations, where Reformed theology becomes infected by other inferior paths of theology and their proponents and their proposals. And so let me just read what Dr. Tipton wrote here concerning the work that he did on Van Til. He says, speaking of his book, that it supplies a sustained account of the classical Reformed Trinitarianism and federalism that Van Til presents as the comprehensive alternative to all forms of correlativism and mutualism. So let's stop really quick right there and just say Van Til is concerned in everything that he ever did. He is concerned that the greatest threat to the church is always a mutualist error. This idea that God and man enter into a mutual existence where they develop alongside of each other. We change because God is in our life, and God changes because we are in God's life. And that is disastrous for your theology. It's pagan, it's Platonic, it's Aristotelian, it's Thomistic, it's Barthian, it's open theistic, it's every sort of deficient and erroneous conception of what later we will talk about in terms of the creator-creature relationship and distinction. And so that is what Van Til is laser focused against. Let me continue. He says here, the theological foundations of confessional Trinitarianism summarized by A.A. Hodge. And so he's simply saying here that this theology that Van Til is developing is confessionally grounded. It is no deviation to confessional standards, Westminster Confession, and I would argue pretty much all the Reformed confessions have this sort of orthodox Trinitarian view of God. And A.A. Hodge, in his exposition of the Westminster Confession, for example, he is going to give you an orthodox understanding of the doctrine of God there. And then he says here, the conception of the absolute personality of the triune God set forth by Herman Bavinck. Now, that's a tough one. The absolute personality of the triune God set forth by Herman Bavinck is where Herman Bavinck is arguing that the only thing that the Trinity is, what we can say, the Trinity simpliciter, the Trinity in itself, the Trinity itself is no more and no less than the persons themselves. And that every aspect of God that you can conceive of is infinitely personal. God is not comprised of parts. So, absolute denial of composition theology. God is simple. And so God, but not only is he simple, and he has attributes that are to be identified with his essence, his being, but that essence, that being, is irreducibly personal. And this is remarkably glorious when you think about this, that there is nothing in God that is not the persons of God, Father, Son, and Spirit. It requires a lot of development, and we'll get to some of that. And then he goes on here. He says, the Autotheon doctrine of absolute Trinitarian persons developed by John Calvin. And so we want to uphold the doctrine of Autotheos. Why? Because that is referring to the time that Calvin spent developing the aseity of the Son in conjunction, consubstantially, in conjunction with the Father and the Spirit. And so this is a direct, this is Calvin directly coming against the concept of a communicated essence through eternal generation as propounded by people like Peter Lombard, Thomas Aquinas, Robert Bellarmine, codified in Trent, and then later even other Reformed proponents. Here he's going to talk about Francis Turretin. But there again, Francis Turretin himself, a Reformed seminal, profound theologian, wavered on the issue of Autotheos and the aseity of the Son, because Turretin attempted to have both a communicated essence and a Son that is God of himself, non-communicated essence. And Dr. Tipton has pointed out elsewhere that amounts to a contradiction in Turretin. So that's an important doctrine. Now, he goes on, the living Trinitarian persons who exhaustively indwell one another in relations of coherence as set forth by Turretin. and Hodge. So stop there. What is he talking about? Co-inherence, indwell one another. This is the doctrine of perichoresis. Perichoresis. And, I'm not going to go too deep here, but just to show you that in the life of the Trinity, each member of the Godhead indwells the other member. And connect that now to the doctrine of absolute personality in Bavinck. How they indwell is a person-to-person permeation, absolute penetration, co-inherence, mutual indwelling. And as we'll go on to see, from here comes Van Til's principle, the representational principle. Because as each member indwells and exhaustively, personally inheres in the other person, they infinitely represent the other person and are a representation of the other person ad infinitum. A text that comes to mind is Hebrews chapter 1, where the Son is what? The Son is the exact, how does the ESV say it? He is the radiance of the glory of God, the exact imprint of his nature. Amazing. And so let me go on, though, because I have so much content tonight. We'll see how far I get before Micah falls asleep on me. And that would be bad because he's behind the technological wheels. So that would be really bad. You still with me, Micah? You still there, brother? You're riding shotgun?
I'm here. I'm just paying attention,
okay.
trying to do what I
Hey,
gotta
brother,
do.
just hang on tight. We'll get through this. The reason I'm reading this quote is because this is the quote. When you read this book, this is the quote. This is the summary of the whole work of the book, which is super, super good. But he goes on. It's not just co-inherence, Turretin and Hodge, but it's also the deeper Protestant conception of Gerhardus Voss, which he talks about here, the conception of the image of God and the doctrine of the covenant of works expounded by Voss. Now that becomes absolutely essential, my dear brethren. It becomes absolutely essential because what is Voss doing in the DPC, the deeper Protestant conception? What is he doing? But coming directly against the deeper Catholic conception of Thomas Aquinas. And how did he do this? By focusing on two things, image and covenant. Do you know that Van Til, every time he would step into a classroom, and Micah, I think I told you this, didn't I? It's actually in the opening flap of this book. You can actually see the two circles up here, right? And yes, yeah. I still have my broken finger thing, sorry. But you see the two circles here?
Yeah.
You have one circle that represents God and the other one represents creation. Mm-hmm. And there's a line, isn't there, that's drawn there?
Right.
Well, Van Til would actually technically draw two lines. He would draw two lines. And those two lines represented the mode of revelation, that God reveals himself to man, what? Via the image and via the covenant. One is nature, the other one is grace. Okay? Where did Van Til get this? He got it from Voss. And so when I say that you can have all these Van Tilian presuppositionalist Bonson enthusiasts, and thankfully so, rightly so, I believe, without a proper understanding of the Vossian foundations of Van Til, you really are missing quite a bit of logic and quite a bit of content and substance to your understanding of the presuppositional method of argumentation. That's a whole nother thing, but here it is here. Then from Voss, what does Tipton say? All of these converge together to forge what Van Til termed the representational principle. Van Til's representational principle is the programmatic response of confessional Reformed Trinitarianism and federalism, covenant theology, to various expressions of correlativism and mutualism. The representational principle necessitates Van Til's distinctive apologetic method of defending the truth of Reformed Trinitarianism and federalism, here it is here, as a unit. And that is super important. Why? Because people want to tear asunder theology. Why do I call this the Reformed path? Because I'm trying to show how all these aspects of Reformed thought go together. They actually adhere. There's a cohesiveness. There is a coherence. It's not a theology, guys, is not a discombobulated system of good ideas. Edmund Clowney, at one point, talking about biblical theology, he quoted someone in one of his books. I think it was The Unfolding Mystery, or Preaching Christ from the Old Testament, or something like that, or in all of Scripture. And he says, the Bible is not a treasure trove of good truths, of wisdom and good ideas and good truths. No, it is an organic revelation. And that organic revelation leads us to an organic world and life view that we call Reformed theology. It is amazing to me, Micah, how that in many circumstances, brother, and in many places that I have done ministry, spoken at conferences, churches, Bible colleges, that I have been asked on multiple occasions to suspend my Reformed theology, to not bring up something like Calvinism or my eschatology. And you know what the reality is? And I know what they're trying to do. And so for the most part, brother, I've attempted to condescend, and I have attempted to, to be gracious and to try to work with folks. And I get it. But the reality is that what you're asking me is an abject impossibility, because every aspect of my theology is connected to every other aspect of my theology. And that's why Van Til said at one point, Defense of the Faith, an error in one point of doctrine will necessarily manifest itself in every other point of doctrine.
Yep.
Because theology is, the Bible says, the faith,
right,
once for all delivered to the saints. We only have the faith. And the faith is a system of thought. It is a organic and harmonious, unified system of Christian theology. And I know that we can get down all the way down to the utter minutia of all of these things. That's not what I'm arguing for here. Micah, I'm not saying, well, your style of worship means you don't have the right Trinity view, the right view of the Trinity. That's not right. What I'm saying. Your mode of baptism, that means that you don't understand eschatology or covenant theology or biblical theology. I'm saying we can disagree on those fine points, but there are certain things we can't really disagree on if we're going to be consistent. And so I know that kind of rhetoric is general and all of that. So, Micah, let's get into some of what is Reformed Trinitarianism.
Yeah. Well, real quick before you...
Yeah, go ahead, because I said a lot. And I mean, we just read Lane's quote, but there was a lot there.
Well, I just want to, just kind of come back to what you and I were talking about before we even went live. And, it really kind of fundamentally comes down to the beginning of the argument. It's like they want, the specific, we'll call them dispensationalists. Dispensationalists don't want to go to the core issue, which is covenant theology, which is what they're really fighting against. They just want to argue about, is it 7 bowls, 7 trumpets, and 7 horns, or whatever all them are. And they just want to, they don't want to talk about, well, are we under works? Are we under grace? Is Israel, and the church the same? All these kind of things. They want to throw around pejoratives, all those kind of things. And so, like, I even look, whenever you started texting me this week saying, this is what we're going to talk about. And I'm like going, you know what, I've been a Christian for 40 plus years or 40 years. I think I kind of got the Trinity down. But I mean, there is so much of what you're talking about right here that is stuff that I haven't even thought about, thought about the necessity of knowing it. So, I mean, I kind of say all that to say kudos, because we kind of all need a kick in the pants every once in a while to kind of go deeper into these thoughts and not forget the Van Tils, the Vosses, the Bavincks, all those guys, and even Bill, who's still with us today, in this kind of mode of thinking.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's a really good assessment of the need, that there are deeper structures that if you don't get down to the deeper structures and all you're doing is trading proof texts.
Yeah.
All you're doing is going back and forth between the interpretation of 1,000 years.
Yeah.
But you're not going down into the depths of theology, kind of like the Van Til approach, which is more indirect, right? Mm-hmm. Van Til was genius because he said, look, if a direct approach means I tell you as a Christian, this rock is 6,000 years old, and you tell me as an atheist, this rock is 6 billion years old or million years old. Right. And all we're doing is examining the rock, but we're not asking the question, what's necessary in order for evidence and proof to be intelligible in the first place? Mm-hmm. We're not getting anywhere.
Right.
You're not actually dealing with metaphysics. You're not actually dealing with the deeper structure. So that's a fair point. That's a good point. Now, let me just talk a little bit about what is Reformed Trinitarianism. You heard it there in Dr. Tipton's book, but I would just say, making it very clear here, the definition of God that is conceived of in the confessions and the creeds. We're not Reformed theology. Obviously, is going to be creedal. It's going to be Westminster, London Baptist, and many others confessions. Right, whether it's the Helvetic confessions, whether it's even Augsburg or Heidelberg confessions, more Lutheran confessions. We have a confessional Protestant idea of what the Trinity is, and going all the way back to the creeds, Nicaea, and of course the Athanasian Creed, we do not reject anything that is in those creedal and confessional formulas, but are seeking to uphold them, if at all possible, to improve upon them. And again, to stress this idea, Reformed Trinitarianism is saying that the Trinity is not an isolated theology. It's not an isolated thought, idea, category. It's not an isolated subject in your systematic theology. It is absolutely integrated to everything in your theology. Thus, Cornelius Van Til would say that that for him, the controlling concept of the Trinity was just that. It was the central idea, the central concept that controlled all of his worldview, all of his arguments, all of his apologetics. It was the ontological Trinity, and how that is the foundation of everything. And of course, we should expect no less. The fact that God and his nature, his being, and his existence to be the foundation of it all, of course. And so the Trinity is also, therefore, because of that, programmatic for theology, for the entire Christian worldview. Every aspect of Christian thought is foundationally and necessarily Trinitarian. This is one of the things, Micah, you mentioned something in terms of, well, I've been a Christian for a long time, the Trinity, I got it, but then you're kind of smacked in the face with, man, there's all these concepts in the Trinity that I've never even known, words I've never even heard, ideas I never even thought about. And so that's what we're saying, is that, one of the things about your average evangelical is they have no concept on how to connect the Trinity to every other aspect of theology. They have no concept of that. And so it's super important that we do so. And, when we think about the idea of Autotheos, which we're talking about Calvin here,
can you break down that word real quick? Autotheos.
What is that? Autotheos?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, autos, self, and then theos, God. And so we're saying again, this is where we get the idea of aseity as well. We're saying again that the Son is of himself in terms of his deity, essence, divinity, that he does not derive his essence from the Father, let's say.
Gotcha.
And so Calvin wanted to argue for the absolute aseity of the Son over against others that denied that aseity was a attribute that was common to the three persons. But they argued instead that this aseity was proper to the Father only, and that then from there a measure of aseity is communicated to the Son as the Son receives the divine essence from the Father. And so that's getting way deep and way ahead for most people. But let me just say that from the Council of Nicaea and from the statement of Nicaea, we're also, Calvin was keen on developing the concept of homoousios. What is homoousios? Homoousios, you remember if you studied any church history with regard to Arianism and Arius, is Athanasius's way to say the Father and the Son are homoousios. That means same substance, same essence. What did Arius say? Arius said similar substance, similar essence. And so is the Son and the Father of a similar essence? No, that's heresy. So where does this lead? Well, Calvin would say Autotheos, the aseity of the Son, is developing the concept of homoousios. And where this leads, Micah, in Reformed Trinitarianism, it leads us to equal ultimacy. What is equal ultimacy? Well, equal ultimacy, of course, is this idea that in God, the three persons, not only are the three persons equal, but listen carefully now, the three persons are equal, but also in God, oneness and threeness are equally ultimate. There are no multiple essences. There's one divine essence. And that divine essence is not parceled out so that the Father has a third of it, the Son has another third of it, right? No. But that those three persons, hypostasis in subsistence, sorry, I got to get technical there for a second, but those three persons in subsistence, all of them irreducibly subsist as the entire triune essence. That's what we mean by equal ultimacy. You know what that does? It rejects and refutes and removes any and all conceptions of subordinationism, where the Son is less than the Father in glory, honor, power, and in any ontological way or at all in any eternal fashion. It eliminates any hierarchical principles in the Trinity, where the Father has come to have some attribute or some principium, some primary essential glory that the Son and the Spirit do not have. No, we eliminate those conceptions for what? For an equal ultimacy where Father, Son, and Spirit are irreducibly one and irreducibly divine. And that is the mystery of the Trinity. It's kind of interesting, Micah, but where we end, where we land at the end of all of this is a mystery. And that's good for us. Sure. The Trinity is not subject to rationalism, where we can say, oh, we figured out exactly how the Trinity works. Right. First, you begin with the Father, and then he, gives birth to the Son, right? And that's where the Son came from, right? And then of course, the Father and Son get together, and then they produce the Holy Spirit. There we go. So it all goes back to the Father.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I always think about how it's typically youth pastors try to pull out some kind of example, like they'll say that the states of water, God is the steam, Jesus is the water, and then the Holy Spirit is ice.
Ice,
it's like,
something, yeah. all human analogies fail.
All human analogies fail. I mean, because that one leads to modalism.
All Venn diagrams fail. There is an ineffable mystery that we'll never get to the bottom of, and that's where we leave it.
Right.
But we don't place it somewhere else either. Yeah. So that's very, very, very important. Now, let me back up here a little bit and talk about mutualism, or the threat of mutualism, more directly. Okay, I know we've been going for a little while, but that's okay. I told you this is going to be a little bit of a longer episode, and for people, this may be one you may need to stop it here, then proceed.
What if I need to stop it sometime? Just
you can go on a keep going break, but that's about it. No nap breaks. But let me just say, in terms of mutualism, you got to remember, mutualism is and correlativism is this idea that ends up in a place where the creator and the creature somehow enter into such a relation that the distinction evaporates. They enter into such a mode of being that they sort of develop alongside of one another. There is some kind of discovery in God. There's some kind of potential in God. And mutualist heresy, mutualist error, it could be of a Thomistic kind, where man is essentially deified or raised up, reproportioned, so that he is elevated above his creaturely nature in order to participate directly in God. That results in mutualism. That's what Lane Tipton calls in this book backdoor mutualism. Also, you can have a mutualist error by the way of modernism, Karl Barth, and other modernist errors that typically will end in the same place, but from the front door, as God, usually through creation or through the incarnation, come down and again participate in a co-developmental state, mode of being, life with man. And once again, the creator-creature distinction is compromised by the creator-creature relation. And we want to affirm in Reformed Trinitarianism that at no point whatsoever, as God relates to the creature, does God lose himself in the process. No matter of its creation, no matter of its incarnation, God does not lose his immutable perfections in the process of relating to the world. And so the God-world relation does not amount to a new property in God, a new attribute, a new aspect, a new mode of being in God. The Creator never enters into, at the essential level, never enters into a mode whereby he is now in time, in space, in matter. God is transcendent. What does the Westminster Confession say? He is what? He is a most pure spirit. He is absolute and eternal. He is out of time. Now, Micah, some weeks ago, I already did an episode on Reformed Trinitarianism. Is such a thing possible? Go back. I did some different work there, what I'm doing here today. But that's just it. Whether you go back to that episode or this one right here, God is not in time, does not subject himself to time, and is not in an environment of time. You see, what we're arguing for here is that God is pure act. And I know that from a Thomistic perspective, that's kind of a controversial statement. But from a Reformed perspective, the only thing that, that Calvin would have meant by that, the only thing that later on Bavinck would mean by that, the only thing that Voss would mean by that, and then others after him, is that there is no potential in God for improvement or development. It doesn't mean because God is pure act, there's no potency in God. It doesn't mean that God is somehow some kind of a static stump, an inert kind of lifeless principle, force, energy, or being. Rather, it's the opposite. Pure act is telling us that God is absolute life, absolute love, absolute light, that God has all that is in God in maximal form, and that there is no oscillation in God. You get this, Micah? There is no oscillating where God goes from one mode of being to another mode of being. Now, let me get Micah to some sort of modern day threats of mutualism. One of them is a very practical one. It's what we're living through right now. We are living through a hyper-relational theology culture in the church. Jesus, take the wheel. Jesus, take the wheel. We're living in a church culture today. Jesus is in the back seat trying to figure out where the GPS is taking us. Okay. But this is contemporary modern evangelical thought, that God is in our experience, that God is, he can't wait to see what we come up with next. He follows us on social media and Facebook, and he likes our posts and subscribes to our channels and, all of this. That God is somehow our big cheerleader in the sky, and he can't wait what we'll come up with next. It's absolutely blasphemous to think of God in that way, all in the name of we want a God that can relate to us and that we can relate to him. And in the midst of that, we lose the absolute transcendence of God, the immutability of God. And I would say probably above everything, Micah, today, the way that that's done is it's done in a denial of impassibility. And that is done through I think a very wrong understanding of anthropomorphic language in the Bible, where God is said to have been angry or rejoice, or that he expresses frustration or grievance. Right. And that we believe that that is actually predicating on the essence of God all the way into the essential being of the Trinity. And that, again, compromises the whole notion of immutability. So got to be careful there. But then you have also great thinkers and proponents and people who have, they've argued the case. John Frame, in his systematic theology, argues that God exists in two modes of being. That God has one mode that he exists within himself, and that mode allows God to be completely immutable, unchangeable, and all the different attributes that we can think about. But at another mode of being, God is said to enter into a historical mode where he can now relate to the creature. What's the result? The result, again, is that you arrive at this mutualist point where God and man commingle together in a shared and developmental reality. And again, very troubling. Scott Oliphant, Dr. Tipton has pointed this out numerous times, and others have as well. God enters into covenants with man. What happens upon the covenant-making process? Scott Oliphant at one point argued this. I don't know if he's changed this. But God adds additional attributes or properties, as he calls them, covenantal properties. He adds to himself. James Dolezal pointed out the same thing in his book, All That Is in God. He has pointed this out, that Oliphant is arguing for covenant making as a path to potential in God for change, thereby denying immutability, and mutualism obtains. Ironically, who is John Frame? Who is Scott Oliphant? They are both students of Van Til. And yet, they actually violate the prime directive. They actually violate about the most foundational principle in all Van Tilian thought. Namely, there is no correlativism. There is no mutualism. There's no co-developmental reality between God and man. There's no panentheism. Pantheism, everything is God. God is everything.
Mm-hmm.
Panentheism is that God and man are mutually dependent upon each other.
So can I ask one question of prayer?
Yep.
God wants us to pray for, let's just say, healing. There are several people around us that are going through it. So whenever we pray, are we asking God to change his mind? Or should we be praying that would be the case? Or is it that we just pray that his will be done because his mind is already set?
Yeah, I mean, in the Reformed world, we operate under the decree of God. And even I think maybe a useful passage would be in Matthew 18 with regard to church discipline. When the church renders a decision, what does it say? If it's viable, if it's legitimate, right? That whatever you bind on earth, and the Greek grammar is very clear, has already been bound in heaven.
Already. Okay.
Yep. And so prayer is the exercise wherein we discover the will of God for our lives in real calendar time.
Gotcha.
Yep. And I think that is part also of what Dozal talks about in terms of the showing of God. That God shows himself to the kind, he shows himself to the merciful, he shows himself as merciful, right? And so God, in the process of revealing himself, right, allows himself to be perceived in these ways, in the mode of prayer, in the mode of providence, in the mode of judgment or salvation. But nothing in God essentially changes. His mind does not change. His being does not change. His decree does not change. So something like that, I think, and that's an excellent answer, or excellent question. I think it's an excellent answer.
Wow, the pride.
A little bit of man praise, self-praise.
Yes.
Well, let me just say one last thing. Also, Bruce Ware.
Mm-hmm.
Again, James Dozal has demonstrated all that is in God, documenting how that Bruce Ware has actually argued for basically that God can sovereignly will his own mutability and that he undergoes experience. D.A. Carson, J.I. Packer, these men speak in these ways that are really, at the end of the day, can be characterized as hopefully sloppy at best, maybe reckless at worst. Because you are at the end of the day arriving at this conclusion. So let me move on from there. Those are kind of the different ways that mutualism can threaten Reformed Trinitarianism. But components of Reformed Trinitarianism, of course, are many. But one of them is that there is a very clear desire to uphold the creator-creature distinction. Very clear. There's God and there is man. And you don't confuse the two, period. And so I think I've talked a lot about that already. But when we're talking about Reformed Trinitarianism, we're also talking about God being self-contained. This is a Van Tilian term. And God is self-contained in the sense that there's no need for development in God. God is pure act. There's no potency in him. There's no ability for him to change in light of the God-world relationship. He is not subject to an environment. He is not in a development with creation. He is simple, meaning he's not comprised of things, parts that slowly build up and amount to the triune God. He simply is, exactly as he told Moses, I am. And so he is therefore impassible. God does not oscillate between emotion. He does not change at all in his immutability. He is absolutely unchanging. And for this, I will read directly out of Malachi chapter 3. Malachi chapter 3. And I think it's remarkable that just as we're getting ready to go from Old Testament to New Testament, we're getting ready for 400 years of silence, as it were. that this is one of the last words we get before we go into the New Testament era. God says in Malachi 3:6, "For I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, O children of Jacob, are not consumed." And so what's the backwards logic? We would be consumed if God were to change. If God were to change, our reality as we know it is over. Religion is over. Truth is over. Our worldview is over. Ethics is over. Metaphysics is over. It's over. Epistemology is over. Science, the laws of nature, over. Gone. It's impossible because you no longer have the eternal, immutable God as the infinite reference point of all things. God does not partake of time and change with the creature. That's Barth's view. Karl Barth argued that God is ever becoming, always changing, basically. Horrible. God does not allow creation to partake in his changeless being. That's Rome. That's Thomas. Part of Reformed Trinitarianism, therefore, is also Autotheos, the aseity of the Son. Calvin argued for the aseity of the Son over against the medieval scholasticism of men like Thomas, Robert Bellarmine, and then before them, Peter Lombard, and many others, as well as other post-Reformation Reformed theologians that still wanted to argue for some kind of communication of essence. Calvin believed that the aseity and the attribute of aseity is part of divine Trinitarian essence, which the Son, together with the Father and the Spirit, have ase ipso, which means of himself, absolutely of himself. Calvin believed in the two ways of speaking. Now, this is very important, but Brandon Ellis has written this book on Calvin and classical Trinitarianism and the aseity of the Son. And in that book, he specifies how that in proper Trinitarian grammar, we must occupy two ways of talking about God. We either speak essentially or essential predication, talking about his essence, or we speak personally in personal predication, referring to the persons. One is absolute, essential predication. The other is relative, personal predication. One is common, the essence, shared among all persons. And the other is proper, that pertain to the persons themselves. In other words, there are certain aspects of the persons that are proper to the persons. Only the Son is begotten. The Father and the Spirit are not begotten. Only the Father begets. The Son and the Spirit do not beget. And only the Spirit is spirated and precedes inspiration. The Father and the Son are not spirated. So whether it is the filiation of the Father, the begetting of the Son, the spiration of the Spirit, these are personal properties that are proper to the persons, and they are not common to all. But when it relates to the essence, all that is in the essence relates to all persons. And so very important there. I knew we were going to do some heavy lifting on that issue there, Thomas, but also, and I don't know how long we've been going, but I knew we'd go for about an hour and a half or so, but let me just keep going here for a sec. Yeah. Calvin, unlike Thomas, unlike Peter Lombard, and even future Reformed theologians, even Turretin, who were sadly inconsistent on this part, did not believe in a communication of essence. And how does the essence get communicated from the Father to the Son? They would argue through eternal generation. Calvin said no, because aseity is a divine attribute. And if it is a divine attribute, that means it's part of the irreducible triune essence of God. And the Son must have it ase ipso. In other words, of himself. He cannot receive the essence from the Father, and the Father cannot give the essence to the Son. No. And the same holds true for the Spirit. As we think about Reformed Trinitarianism, we're also reminded of the doctrine of perichoresis. We started out talking about perichoresis, but perichoresis is really important. Let me get to this, Micah, because before you fall asleep and before people tune out, I hope maybe even if you paused this episode, came back to it later, that you'll go all the way to perichoresis and then what I have to say here about the Trinitarian foundations of Reformed federalism, which is what we're going to look at next time, Lord willing. The perichoresis is crucial. Why? Because in Reformed Trinitarianism, perichoresis establishes both the nature of the self-contained God as well as the divine principle of representation, listen now, which is replicated in image-bearing Adam, where? Within the context of the covenant of works. Why? Because perichoresis says, person to person, they co-indwell each other and thereby personally co-indwell each other and thereby have the capacity to infinitely represent one another. Adam, in the image of God, has the capacity not only to be indwelled by God, but also to represent his humanity, his species, if you would, so that God, who is sui generis, what does that mean? God, sui generis just means he's in a class by himself, okay? God is not just the greater type of the same of other people or in the same category as God. No, he that's why when we talk about God's goodness or God's faithfulness or God's sovereignty, it's not just that he has a little bit more goodness than we have, right? God's goodness is to be identified with his being. And because God's goodness is identified with his being, that means that we don't have the goodness of God. We don't have God's thoughts in our mind. You see, that would make us God. So God is in a class all his own. But Adam, who's created in the image of God, because of this principle of perichoresis, he has the capacity to know this idea of dwelling places like the temple and Eden and that whole dwelling motif in the Bible comes from the indwelling idea of perichoresis, and the representational principle Van Til comes directly from perichoresis, where image-bearing Adam has the capacity to represent his humanity, even as the triune God has the capacity to represent person and person to person, or person from person. And therefore, perichoresis becomes super important. My last point. Last point is that we can now start seeing how the Trinity becomes the foundation of Reformed federalism and covenant theology. The Trinity, therefore, becomes the deepest logical foundation of the ontological Trinity of covenant theology because of the doctrine of perichoresis and the representational principle. Van Til called this the representational principle because of its replication in Adam, who is immediately put in the context of a covenant of works, where he serves to represent his humanity so as to advance them into glory. And so when we're talking about Reformed Trinitarianism, Micah, these are just some of the things that go into the vastness of Reformed thought. And what I am endeavoring to do, Lord willing, in the future, is to take each one of these, whether it's Reformed Trinitarianism, Reformed federalism, biblical theology, apologetics, and eschatology, and develop those as their own series of studies and exposition, because nothing less will do.
Right.
And that's what each one of these subjects requires. So
right.
I hope that people found this time. I know it's long. I know it's a lot, but I hope that people profited something out of this, and that people will go back, and that they will come back to this episode time and again to be challenged, provoked, edified, and at least, if nothing else, to go out and do your own study and go search these things out. So, yeah. Any last thoughts on that?
Well, just in that last with what you just last said of where is, I mean, are we just go pick up a Defense of the Faith? Is it where would you point people to?
Yeah, we did this in the last episode of Reformed Trinitarianism, but you definitely need to pick up Reformed Dogmatics by Voss.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to read volume 1 if you get the 5 volumes, which they're small, or you get the one
small
volume, which is like 1,200 pages, right? That just put those 5 volumes into one. But you need to read volume 1 of Voss on Doctrine of God. Then you need to start working through Reformed Dogmatics by Bavinck. Okay. I would also recommend that people pick up Introduction to Systematic Theology by Cornelius Van Til. And then I would also tell people to get another book, which is a real simple book. You have it, Micah. I think you've read it, which is The Foundations of Covenant Theology by Lane Tipton. That book is super accessible, but remarkably profound and very well written. And then if you want to, take the dive, you pick up this PhD thesis right here that has been totally reworked, and work through this right here, The Trinitarian Theology of Cornelius Van Til by our friend Tipton. And you start going down that path, and you will be really enriched. Also, if you are wanting to go much further, I would read B.B. Warfield. I think it's volume 5, of his 10-volume set on Calvinism. And in that volume, he has a very, very famous article on Calvin and the Trinity. Next to the stuff I already cited, I mean, that's right at the top.
Okay. Well, great. Well,
good stuff. Great.
Yeah, I feel like we just skimmed the surface, so I hope that you do kind of spend some time and we can go deeper into this, but I think this was a great start.
Sweet. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and make sure you follow us, share, subscribe to the channel. We got to get up to that 10,000, that 10K.
Yeah.
We're still at like 9.5.
Yeah, just hold
We need
steady.
to make a push. Anyway, super blessed that you joined us. God bless you guys.
God bless. See you guys.